Well, I'd like to thank everybody for turning up today. November the 8th marks the introduction of universal credit. Now, we can talk an awful lot about what universal credit actually involves, but the fundamental question that remains is how are we actually going to fight it? How are we actually going to stop universal credit in its tracks? Now, there's been a few remarks made over the last couple of weeks comparing universal credit potentially with the poll tax, saying that this could be May's poll tax. Now, we should actually learn the lessons from the poll tax campaign. It's absolutely and utterly bound up, the experience of the poll tax campaign, with the situation that we're actually going through now. Because the poll tax campaign brought down Margaret Thatcher, and the poll tax campaign ensured that we would actually see devolution brought to Scotland. Because remember the situation in the wake of the poll tax campaign. Many Scots vowed that they would no longer be used as guinea pigs by Westminster elites intent on using us as some kind of experiment, as some kind of laboratory, as some kind of petri dish in order to push through their ideologically based neoliberal ideas. And what do we see now? We see a situation where devolution has actually brought some powers within the orbit of Holyrood, but by no means enough. Only 14% of welfare powers were actually transferred in the wake of the Smith Commission in late 2014. And I would make the observation now that I believe it was a mistake for the Scottish Government to sign off Smith on that basis. Because we were sold a pup and a poke. That's the real situation that we actually had in the wake of the referendum. If you remember the referendum, we were actually promised fundamental devolution, meaningful devolution. But in reality, what we have is nothing more than a pocket money parliament. And that pocket money parliament cannot even look after the interests of the most vulnerable people within Scotland. We've made this point timeless on timeless occasions. That the situation is this, that our most vulnerable people in Scotland are not safe in the hands of the Westminster elites. And what we see now with the introduction of universal credit is a move towards the creation not of a welfare system that is streamlined, but of a new gulag state surveillance system aimed at making the experience of actually being unemployed so unpleasant that people will work at any wages in order to get out from under the DWP. That is the situation that we face. And we've got to say this, is that universal credit does have the ability to actually become the new poll tax. Because universal credit does not just affect those people who are out of work or who are disabled, but affects those people who are on minimum wage and low wages. You come under the sanctioning capability of the DWP. If you're a low-paid worker, you cannot take a holiday abroad. For the period of time that you're taking a holiday abroad, your working tax credits will be removed. That is the situation that everybody within universal credit faces. It's not just the unemployed, it's not just the disabled. It's working class people in low paid and even in middle income jobs. Many of the people within the DWP themselves have actually subject to sanctioning as a result of being transferred onto universal credit. And we have had examples of people within the DWP being sanctioned. And in a situation where DWP work coaches are sanctioned, they have to bring in somebody from another DWP office in order to sanction them. So it's only a matter of time before we get DWP work coaches, as they're called, turning up at our stalls asking for advice on how to fight the sanctions. That is the situation that we are in at this present moment in time. So the other issues here is that this is the move towards a gulag state. There's no escape for this gulag. There's no barbed wire around it. The whole of society is the gulag, according to universal credit and according to the DWP. So the issue is this, is that the fight against universal credit is not just a fight for welfare rights, but it's also a fight for citizen rights. Because all those people that are within universal credit are actually being, having fundamental citizenship rights removed from them. They're absolutely under the guidance and the control of the state and in a fundamentally unacceptable way. So this raises the question, how do we fight universal credit? I raised the issue of the poll tax. The poll tax reduced Thatcher, got her out of office and delivered devolution. Now what we didn't want to hear today is any politicking over the issue of universal credit. The thing that we're interested in trying to do is build a broad-based alliance throughout Scottish society that can take the fight to Westminster over the issue of welfare rights and devolution. We have cases every day of people who are not in any fit state to work, who are being pushed off of employment and support allowance. 50% of the cases that we deal with involve people being removed from employment and support allowance and put on a job seekers allowance. These are people, some of them, with very, very serious conditions. People who have grand mal epilepsy, who have collapsed lungs, who have major problems with cancer. This is the issue that we are actually dealing with. People who have recently had heart attacks are being denied access to unemployment and support allowance. Because we underline this point that universal credit has nothing at all to do with streamlining a ridiculously complex and Byzantine welfare state. That is absolutely the case. It is Byzantine. It is complex. Nobody can figure it out. But it's got nothing at all to do with the introduction of universal credit with streamlining that system. It's got everything to do with absolutely and utterly destroying the legacy of the 1945 Labour government and the introduction of the welfare state. They want everybody to be dependent on your family rather than the state. They say that welfare is not a right. And we say, why the hell do we pay our taxes if we cannot rely on the government to be there when we are actually in a situation of need? And this applies to myself personally. Over a year ago, I was actually diagnosed with autoimmune hepatitis. I've now developed serious side effects with regards to the steroids that they've actually put me on. I had no idea I would actually end up in that situation. I thought I was indestructible. You never know what's around the corner. Anybody can have an accident at work, and you will be in the maws of the DWP, and you will see the reality of what we are actually facing on a daily basis outside the brew and the kind of horror stories that we actually hear from people on a daily basis. So we have to fight against universal credit. And in the process of fighting, we have to develop a mass campaign that is not just restricted to political parties, but encompasses major civic and civil organisations throughout Scotland. And it cannot come from the Scottish Unemployed Workers Network. It must come from other organisations who must join us. We put forward the position that we should develop a broad-based campaign in our book, Righting Welfare Wrongs. That issue was taken up by Paul Laverty, the writer of I, Daniel Blake, but it's not been taken up by any other people. We want, we want people to address this issue directly. I would make this point to Jimmy Black and make it a point to the Labour Party spokespeople, and I would also make the point to the Dundee Trades Council. If Dundee Trades Council took up the issue of stopping universal credit and make a call for other organisations to become involved in that campaign, starting in Dundee, then we can roll it out on a Scottish-wide basis. This is an opportunity to unite the progressive forces within Scotland, because make no mistake, the issue of independence has led to a major split within the progressive and socialist and trade union forces within Scotland. So what we've got to tend to do is ensure that that division is actually healed over the issue of uniting around a campaign that we can all agree on, a set of demands that we can all agree on. And surely we can agree on this, that universal credit has to go. It has to go because the price is not worth paying. What we see every day is tragedy after tragedy. When is the meat grinder actually going to stop? It won't stop. It has to be stopped by us. It has to be stopped by us uniting behind a broad-based campaign encompassing civic society throughout Scotland, sending a message to Westminster. Withdraw universal credit. We want a welfare system in Scotland that actually returns the dignity to people who are actually claiming unemployment benefits and disability benefits. People who are unemployed through no fault of their own. They're disabled through no fault of their own. So therefore they should not be treated like criminals and third-class citizens. It's little better than dogs when they actually go and attempt to try and reclaim what is rightfully theirs. Because what they are saying is that unemployment benefit and social security is not a right. But we say it is a right. We pay for it every day through our taxes. We pay for it every day through our national insurance. And it's not just national insurance. How many people pay VAT? Everybody has to pay VAT. But what we're getting now is a situation inside the NHS where they're actually now having a discussion about the possibilities of actually introducing lifestyle penalties. So if somebody drinks, then they can't look forward to actually getting a new liver. If somebody smokes, then they're not actually going to receive treatment if they develop lung cancer or other diseases associated with smoking. This is an absolute disgrace. The reality is that smokers and drinkers put more into the national economy than just about any other consumer. The amount of taxes that they put in terms of what the taxes that are on cigarettes and alcohol. That is the reality of the situation. So I'll make the appeal again in closing. We'll call on every single representative here to have a real discussion about a united campaign starting in Dundee. Dundee was the birth of the Labour movement in Scotland. We were one of the pioneering areas that saw the birth of the Labour movement in Scotland, and we were one of the pioneering areas that saw the vote for independence in Scotland in 2014. We should bring these two traditions together. And if we bring those two traditions together, then we are unstoppable. The Tories are the only people who benefit through our disunity and through the sectarian divisions that have developed in Scottish society. We've got to bring people together, and we'll bring people together on a campaign that we can all agree on. And that is the destruction of the universal credit and the destruction of the Tory party and May's chaotic government. Get rid of them, for God's sake, go! And let's get rid of the Tories once and for all. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much to Tony, and he's made a call out to other people and other members of civil society, so I'll hand straight over to Mike Arnott to respond to that call.
Thanks very much, Sarah. Full of that. Coming here on behalf of Dundee Trade Union Council to reiterate our support for the call for the abolition of universal credit. It's something horrendous on its way, being rolled out today in Dundee and across the UK. Something reminiscent of the 1930s. If you just Google it, you will see in the papers, disaster waiting to happen, a social policy disaster, a disaster for the self-employed, an unmitigated disaster, and a shambolic disaster. I think from that you get the kind of flavour as to what we mean when we talk about the issues raised by the rollout of universal credit. To me, it's something reminiscent of the 1930s. And I know that call has been made over the years since Thatcher's time. We're going back to the 30s. But as we stand here, it's very appropriate because there's a famous 1930s black and white photograph of this exact spot showing unemployed workers clearing these streets, the Unemployed Assistance Board and the means test of the 1930s. The situation where people had to go and walk around knocking on the doors of shops and factories and other places looking for work. And you have to demonstrate under universal credit that you have spent a full 35 hours a week looking for work. The Unemployed Assistance Board and the means test in the 1930s was divisive. It split up families. It caused immense distress to people in poverty. That's what universal credit is going to do here and has been doing where it's been rolled out. Where a digital version's been rolled out, there are 80% of people within a year have found themselves in poverty and in arrears. This will affect people being able to pay their rent. This will be able to affect people who are on maternity leave. This will affect workers, self-employed, low-paid, unemployed. This affects the disabled and people on disability benefits. It is a horrendous version of the unemployed assistance that we saw in the 1930s and created a generation who were devastated by the effects of that legislation at the time. We say no. We say no to universal credit. We call on our political masters and those around us, and yes, Tony pointed out the various aspects of civil society. We need to stand beside the people here to say that we can't go with universal credit, and we need to start treating people who find themselves in the need to requirement for universal credit. We need to stand by those people and say we will not see them scapegoated. We will not see them abused in the way the Department of Work and Pensions abuses these people. Our fellow citizens, our next door neighbours, people that we bump into and speak to every day are being abused by the DWP and by this government in a way which is horrendous, and as I said before, that we thought had seen the back door in the 1930s. But it's back, and it's back big time. And we must stand across the community with all those different groups who are a way to be hammered by universal credit, to stand up in solidarity with them and to say that the likes of the Scottish Unemployed Workers Network and their volunteers and supporting organisations who have been here not for days, not for months, but for years, standing with those victims of the DWP, offering them support week after week, bringing their stories to the attention of the people of Dundee. If people would only read and listen to the stories of their fellow citizens. I would like to show again our support for the work of the Scottish Unemployed Workers Network. To me, it's the most uplifting and inspiring political campaign that has been going on in this city for the last few years. And the work they have done in supporting individuals and in bringing the individual's plight to the attention of those who have their eyes opened and know what's going on is an inspiration. And I will urge, and I've always urged, our affiliated trade unions in Dundee to support the Scottish Unemployed Workers Network. We've supported them in other campaigns they've run, and we will continue to do so. So the final word to the people of Dundee: the Hungry 30s are back. They're back with universal credit, and every time you walk past and you see the Scottish Unemployed Workers Centre out here offering advice and support to the victims of that system, please give them your support, give them money in the donation boxes, and give them cheer to support them as they stand out here in the cold as volunteers, doing an incredible job of solidarity with ordinary people on the streets of Dundee. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Mike. And you know, we need more volunteers actually. If you feel you'd like to stand out in the cold with us, that'd be brilliant. Meanwhile, I'm going to hand over to Jimmy Black, who, as we know, chaired the Poverty Commission, and knows a lot about the poverty in this city before universal credit, and as we know, it's only getting worse. Jimmy.
Hello, my name is Jimmy Black. I was the chair of the Fairness Commission in Dundee. And what that commission was about, we took the great and good of the city and we mixed them up with some of the people who are living in poverty, and we gathered the stories of the people who were living in poverty, and we made the great and good of the city listen. And we asked them to go back to their powerful organisations and try and do something about the state of poverty and inequality in the city, and they promised to do that. And of course now what we have to do is ensure that they keep their promise. And we've heard a lot about universal credit, and that's a hugely important issue. But actually there's a much broader spread of issues that we need to deal with, poverty being one of them. We spoke to carers who are trying to live on a pittance, looking after elderly relatives, disabled relatives, people with dementia, carers who have very great difficulty in even getting out of the house and are living on buttons. And I spoke to someone recently and I said, what would be the thing that would make the biggest difference to your life? And what she said was money. We have so little money, we cannot get out of the house, we can't have any entertainment, we are simply doing our job as carers, and basically there is no fun in life. And I think people deserve a wee bit of fun, entertainment and enjoyment, because they are saving the state a huge amount of money by doing the caring job that they do. Now universal credit comes in, and you know, there was a germ of a good idea in universal credit. It would make the benefit system simpler, and the benefit system is ridiculously complicated. One of the things we found in the Fairness Commission is that people just simply don't understand the system. And it's only when you hit a crisis, when you're made redundant by one of Dundee's big companies, it's only then when you discover that it's a complicated world out there, and you don't just necessarily get given lots of money to keep your house going and to keep yourself going. It's much harder than that. And what's worse, one of the things we found in the Fairness Commission was the facelessness of the new system. You can't just go along to the office and speak to someone. You can't go and find the person who's going to make the decision about your claim. You've got to make phone calls and expensive phone lines, and maybe doing something about that now at long last. You have to do things by computer, and it's only in exceptional circumstances you actually get to speak to a real human being, and that real human being actually doesn't know much about your claim and is going to have to refer the decision to somebody far, far away. So it's a faceless system. It's full of disincentives. The idea that you don't get your money for a long time means that you're living on nothing for weeks and weeks and weeks. It's just totally unfair. So yes, the universal credit should be stopped because it's a flawed system. They took the money out of it, and by cutting the money out of it, they made it impossible to implement. So what can we do about it locally? I think the Scottish Unemployed Workers Network have done a tremendous job. They have stood out here in the cold, and they've been abused by many people, and they've taken it and they've helped claimants get their rights, and that's what I suggest is we do help claimants get their rights. We can also support people like the food banks. The food banks should not exist, they should not have to exist, but they do exist because they are required, and they are required because the state is letting down the poor of this country, and therefore support the food banks. But let's try and work to make sure that we don't need them anymore. And as for the politicians, well, I was a politician, I'm not a politician any longer, but what I can tell you is that if you go and lobby politicians and remind them that things are not right in the city, that there are people living in poverty, that there are people suffering inequalities, then they will have to do something about it. Don't let them forget the poor. And so get along to politicians' surgeries, your local councillor, your MSPs, remind them constantly that this is the most important issue in the city that we face. And, you know, they want to do their best for the city. Politicians of all political parties want to do their best. But they can't do anything, they can't know anything, unless the people who are actually suffering the inequality and the poverty tell them their story and get the support from everyone else here. So with that, what I say is, let's not forget that Dundee has huge inequalities. Let's not forget that it is all of our responsibilities to tackle this problem. And I commend the work of the Scottish Unemployed Workers Network, and I hope they can continue to do that. And with that, I'll stop. Thank you.
So, just to say thanks to everybody who's been here, but you know, this is just, we've made a protest, we've spoken, but this has to be just the beginning. It has to be the beginning of a major campaign. And I just Just to give you an idea for those, we've been hearing it's a disaster, but I just thought I'd jot down just a few things to just show you quite what a disaster it is. So due to the delayed first payment, we know from places that have already got universal credit that over 80% of people on universal credit have fallen into rent arrears. And in some cases, this is leading to eviction. We know that hardship payments being loans, that's just creating more debt. The major cuts that has brought in, especially to people in work. And I don't know if anybody remembers all that fuss there was about the cuts to working tax credits. This is basically bringing in those cuts, slightly different, but through universal credit. And the cuts to the disabled, the cuts in disabled premiums, around 500,000 people across the UK will lose up to £3,000 a year through that. Disabled people, some of them really seriously disabled. There are sanctions for people in work. People are expected to spend their entire time, 35 hours, looking for work. There's no allowance for holidays. We know that it's digital by default, even for people who have real problems either getting to or using computers. And we know from a whistleblower, there was a whistleblower in writing in The Independent who explained that he works for the people who look at all you're doing it online, so they're supposed to be dealing with everybody's online systems, and he basically said there aren't enough people, there isn't enough training, you put something in that system and nobody looks at it. You have to look at it, you have to look at what you're told, because if you don't do it, you can be sanctioned, but they don't look at your problems, and I think that's indicative of the whole attitude of the whole system. It's nothing to do with helping people, it's everything to do with punishing people, controlling people, and making cuts to our welfare system. Thank you.